End quote. What an oppose. Is he going to do, call the cops? That's what this kid Braden actually said to my face, standing right there in the middle of my own driveway with a plastic traffic cone like he was guarding the entrance to the Pentagon or something, and the irony was so thick I could have cut it with a tactical knife because, well, I am the cops. Not just any cop either, but after 20 years of climbing the ladder from a beat officer to a detective and finally to the chief of police in this quiet little suburb of Oak Ridge Heights, I've seen every kind of criminal mind there is, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for the sheer, unadulterated audacity of a bored suburban HOA president with a power trip and a discount security guard on her payroll. You see, my name is Elias Vance, and I moved to Silver Leaf Estates about 2 years ago after my wife, Sarah, passed away from a long battle with cancer because I needed a fresh start for my daughter, Chloe, who was just starting high school and needed stability, quiet streets, and a place where the biggest drama was supposed to be about who forgot to bring the potato salad to the block party. For the first year, it was exactly that, just a peaceful neighborhood with the smell of freshly cut grass and the sound of distant lawnmowers on Saturday mornings. But then came the internal elections, and Vivian Thorne took the reins of the HOA board. And suddenly, the neighborhood started feeling less like a community and more like a high-security prison run by a woman who wears pastel blazers that crinkle like a bag of sun-dried tomatoes every time she points a finger at you. Vivian is one of those people who views a blade of grass that's a quarter-inch too long as a personal insult to her legacy, and she drives this pristine white SUV with a vanity plate that says in Oppos, "Blessed in Oppos," while she spends her afternoons patrolling the streets with a clipboard like she's hunting for fugitives instead of checking for visible trash cans. The whole mess started over something so incredibly petty that I actually laughed when I got the first notice because about 3 months ago, I had a small sinkhole in my driveway professionally repaired, and the contractor did a beautiful job, but the new asphalt was just a shade darker than the original concrete. A detail you'd only notice if you were literally on your hands and knees with a magnifying glass. Vivian didn't need Oppos. She needed a magnifying glass, though. She just needed a reason to exert control, and within 48 hours, I had a $125 fine for an Oppos. Unauthorized surface materials disrupting the visual harmony of the community and Oppos. And even though I sent her the city permits and the contractor an Oppos, receipts showing it was a safety repair, she rejected the appeal within minutes, telling me that an Oppos, visual harmony and Oppos, was the bedrock of our property values. I'm a busy man. I was in the middle of a massive racketeering investigation at the precinct, and Chloe was struggling with her junior year, so I figured I'd just pay the Oppos, crazy tax and Oppos, to make this woman go away, thinking that would be the end of it. But in my 20 years of wearing a badge, I've learned one universal truth about bullies. If you give them an inch, they'll take a mile, and then try to sue you for the footprints you left behind. A few weeks later, after I'd pulled a double shift and came home looking like I'd wrestled a grizzly bear, Chloe forgot to pull the recycling bin in from the curb until about an hour after the pickup truck left, and the very next morning, a certified letter was taped to my door with a $250 fine for an Oppos, habitual noncompliance in Oppos, and a warning about an Oppos, enhanced enforcement measures. And Oppos. I remember standing there in my wrinkled uniform, clutching a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt rubber, staring at that letter, and thinking about the murderers and drug dealers I'd put behind bars who had more reasonable attitudes than my own HOA president. But I decided to play it cool, stay under the radar, and just keep being me in Oppos, construction guy in Oppos. The neighbors thought I was because in this town, being the chief of police makes you a target for every person with a parking ticket grievance. And I just wanted a home that was a sanctuary, not a courtroom. But then came that Saturday morning at 7 a.m., the kind of morning where the dew is still heavy on the hydrangeas, and you just want to sit on your porch and exist, when I heard the distinct sound of boots on my pavement and voices raised in that specific tone of unearned authority. I opened the door to find Vivian Thorne marching on my driveway with a measuring tape in her hand, followed by this kid Braden, who couldn't in Oppos. He had been more than 22, wearing a tactical vest he clearly bought on the internet and a fake silver badge that was gleaming a bit too brightly in the morning sun. Vivian didn't in Oppos, to even offer and Oppos, good morning in Oppos, before she started shouting about how my mailbox was positioned 3 inches too close to the curb according to the new NAPOs, Safe Street Amendments and APOs, and that I had 48 hours to relocate it or face a $500 fine and a lien on my property. Braden was standing there with his chest puffed out, hands on his belt like he was carrying his sidearm instead of a heavy-duty flashlight, nodding along with every word Vivian said like she was the Oracle of Delphi. And that's when I felt that old detective itch start to tingle at the back of my neck, the one that tells you you're not just looking at a nuisance, you're looking at a crime scene. I took a slow sip of my coffee, looked Braden dead in the eye, and asked him what kind of law enforcement certification he held that gave him the right to stand on my private property and issue legal threats. And his face went that specific shade of beet red you only see in people who realize they're in over their heads. He stammered something about an APOs, online security protocols diploma and APOs, and Vivian stepped in, her blazer crinkling aggressively as she told me that Braden was an APOs, enforcement officer in APOs, hired with full board approval to protect our community from APOs, undesirable elements in APOs, and APOs, unregulated activities and APOs. I just smiled. The kind of polite, terrifying smile I used to give suspects right before the handcuffs came out, and I told them I'd be happy to comply once I saw the certified board minutes where Braden's position was created and the specific bylaw language regarding the mailbox. But Vivian just snapped her clipboard shut and told me that in APOs, documentation would be provided with the formal summons in APOs before they strutted away. Now, here's the thing about being a detective for 2 decades. You don't stop being a cop just because you're off the clock, and something about the way Vivian flinched when I mentioned in APOs, board minutes and APOs, stayed with me all through my shift that day. That night, I sat down at my kitchen table with a laptop and started doing what I do best, which is digging through the digital paper trail that everyone thinks they've deleted but never actually have, and what I found was so much better than a mailbox dispute. I pulled up the state's business registry and discovered that the Silver Leaf Estates Homeowners Association had been legally dissolved nearly 4 years ago for a total failure to file annual reports or pay state fees, meaning that for the last 48 months, Vivian Thorne had been running a phantom organization, a legal ghost that had no more right to fine me than the guy at the drive-thru window. As I dug deeper into the county tax records and the HOA's leaked bank statements, thank God for old friends in the auditor's office, the picture started to get even uglier because it wasn't in APOs. Just about the fines, it was about a systematic campaign of suburban cleansing. I saw a pattern of heavy fines and aggressive and APOs, security monitoring and APOs, targeted almost exclusively at families who didn't in APOs. Fit Vivian's and APOs, Vision and APOs for the neighborhood, mostly younger families of color, single parents, and anyone who dared to question her authority. And then I saw the kicker. 6 of those properties have been sold in the last 2 years for significantly under market value after the owners were hounded by APOs, liens and APOs, and in APOs, legal fees and APOs, and 3 of those houses have been purchased by a shell company registered to none other than Vivian's brother-in-law. This wasn't an APOs, a neighborhood watch. It was a racketeering operation disguised as a civic duty, and Vivian had been using Braden as her personal thug to stalk and intimidate people into fleeing their own homes. The situation turned from professional to deeply personal when Chloe came home from school on Monday, looking pale and shaken, and told me that Braden had been sitting in his blacked-out sedan in the student parking lot, taking photos of her and her friends and telling the school resource officer that he was an APOs, monitoring a high-risk household and APOs for the HOA. My blood didn't in APOs. Just boil. It turned into liquid nitrogen, but I knew that if I moved too fast, I'd only catch the small fry. So I spent the next 48 hours building a case file that would make a federal prosecutor weep with joy, coordinating with the district attorney and my own financial crimes unit under the cover of an APOs, routine training exercises and APOs. On Wednesday evening, Vivian had called one of her and APOs, emergency community standards and APOs, meetings at the local library, a meeting she'd advertised with flyers claiming she was going to address the APOs, rising criminal influence in APOs in the neighborhood, a thinly veiled reference to me and the APOs, mysterious men in unmarked cars and APOs, who had been visiting my house. who were actually just my fellow officers coming over for a Saturday barbecue. I walked into that room wearing a plain flannel shirt and jeans, sitting in the very back while Vivian stood at the podium in a bright red blazer, looking like she was presiding over a royal court as she launched into a tirade about how and Oppos, certain residents and Oppos, were a cancer on the community and Oppos, as property values, and how we needed to authorize a new $5,000 emergency assessment to fund an Oppos, enhance private security and Oppos, to keep our children safe. She looked directly at me, her voice dripping with that fake, sugary concern, and said, and Oppos, Mr. Vance, we all want what's best for Silverleaf, but your refusal to respect our standards has forced our hand, and Oppos. And that's when I stood up, not as a disgruntled neighbor, but as the man who was about to end her entire world. I walked down the center aisle, the room going dead silent as I pulled my badge from my pocket and set it right on the podium next to her clipboard, and I saw the color drain from her face so fast I thought she might actually faint. I told her, loud enough for every single person in that room to hear, that I'd spent the last 72 hours reviewing the state's dissolution records, and that she had been collecting money under the name of a non-existent corporation for 3 years, which in the state of Illinois is called felony wire fraud and grand theft. Then I signaled to the back of the room, and the doors swung open as 4 of my uniformed officers walked in, including Sarah Coleman from Financial Crimes, who was carrying a stack of arrest warrants thick enough to be a novel. We didn't in Oppos. Just arrest Vivian. We picked up Braden at his in Oppos, patrol post in Oppos, and served search warrants on her brother-in-law's office at the same time, uncovering a mountain of evidence showing that they had stolen over $60,000 in Oppos, fines in Oppos, and into Oppos, assessments in Oppos, from the residents of Silverleaf Estates. Money that had been funneled directly into a private vacation fund and a series of illegal real estate flips. The look on Vivian's face as she was led out in handcuffs, her crinkly blazer finally silenced by the click of the metal on her wrists, was the most satisfying thing I've seen in 20 years of police work. But the real victory was seeing the neighbors, the people who had been living in fear of her clipboard, finally standing up and talking to each other again without looking over their shoulders. We spent the next few months untangling the mess, getting the stolen money back to the families who had been scammed, and helping the neighborhood form a real, legal, and actually helpful community board that doesn't and Oppos own a single measuring tape. Looking back on it, I realized that people like Vivian only thrive because they rely on the fact that most good people are too busy, too tired, or too polite to fight back against a bully in a blazer, and they never expect the Oppos, construction guy in Oppos, next door to be the one who knows exactly how to tear their house of cards down. But it makes me wonder how many other neighborhoods are out there right now where someone is being fined into poverty by a ghost organization? How many in Oppos, Braden's and Oppos, are out there playing dress-up with people in Oppos, lives because nobody is asked to see their credentials? I did my part for Silverleaf, but I can't help but think about the thin line between community order and suburban tyranny. So I gotta ask you guys, have you ever looked into the legal status of the people telling you how to live your life? Have you ever felt like your own home wasn't and Oppos yours because of a rule that sounded a little too much like a personal grudge? Drop a comment below and tell me if you think I should have handled it quietly, or if a public takedown is the only language these people understand. Because from where I'm sitting, sometimes you have to let the bully think they've won, just so you can make sure they never play the game again. End quote.